and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me tonight is Candace Stewart, the studio manager at East West Studios in Hollywood. Candace is an industry veteran with over 30 years of experience in recording studio management. She's managed facilities like Take One Recording, Red Zone, Soundcastle, and Firehouse Studios. In her tenure as a manager, she's witnessed many technological changes in the industry, but her commitment remains the same: to facilitate artists and all those who create music in any way possible. She's worked with artists across all genres of music, from the Rolling Stones, the Foo Fighters, Madonna, Lady Gaga, Justin Timberlake, Pharrell, and even Snoop Dogg. So, Candace, what a pleasure to have you join 3Q. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. When you read that bio, it just makes me realize how long I've been doing this.
All right, well, that's the perfect way to get started. Are you ready for the first question?
Sure.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give her on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give her from a business perspective?
Uh, Personal note, don't get married till you're 40. Uh, Professional note, stick with engineering and stay an engineer. I quit being an assistant engineer and became a booker pretty early on because I thought I didn't have the electronics aptitude to be amazing. And looking back, I think I probably would have been pretty good.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
But no regrets, no regrets.
So, like, how did you get into what you're doing now? I feel like I don't want to say it's a niche area of the business, but not many people think about it when they're trying to get into the business.
It's interesting because traditionally, especially in this time when everyone's wanting to be inclusive and stuff, obviously, which is awesome, the position of studio manager has almost always traditionally been female. I don't know whether that's because, I don't know, we're more naturally hospitable, whatever. There's some great male managers for sure, but people ask me that for some reason all the time. But how I originally got into it was I have three older brothers. They're all amazing. The two oldest were musicians. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was actually born in LA, but I grew up in Charleston, and they left South Carolina to become rock stars. So they left in like the late 60s, early 70s and came out to LA, and they worked at the record plant. They got jobs at the record plant on 3rd Street, and they both became, at that time, they called them janitors, but they runners, basically. They became janitors, then assistants, and they both moved on to become first engineers freelance, which is still the same trajectory today. So I would come out and visit in high school, and, they'd be working with Stevie Wonder and doing all this cool stuff. And I was like so proud. And my third brother, who's nearest me, he worked there also, but he's a photographer. He was doing more like artistic stuff, like light shows and stuff. But yeah, so I would come out and visit in high school. I thought it was cool, but I was going to school. I am not a musician, and I was going to take a completely different path. I was a psych major with a business minor. So I was going to
Wow.
be a marriage counselor.
Oh my gosh.
And so everybody was in LA. Got out of college, came out again when I was like right before I was 26. And I started working for my brother, Steve, who had taken over a room at the old Kendon. It was called Take One. And at 619 South Glenwood Place in Burbank, it's still there. It's called Glenwood Place. Atlantic has it now. The manager there, Kit Rebun, also female, very awesome. But I came out and was working for Steve part-time during the day, and I was bartending at night because that's what I had done to put myself through school. And he started teaching me how to be an assistant. And I was working two jobs for quite a while. And I got married too young. That didn't last very long. The hours were kind of brutal, but I love the studio and I love being around people. I had worked in hospitality and it was a natural transition. It's a customer service job. So you're helping people. And about a year in, that's when I kind of had the realization that I didn't think I had what it took to be an amazing engineer. But I told my brother, I said, I'd love to help you book the studio. And so that's what I decided to do, and doing some just grassroots marketing. And one of the very first things I booked, one of the first major sessions I booked was Appetite for Destruction with Guns N' Roses. And it's because Mike Klink had also worked at the record plant. So anybody listening to this, if you're in the engineering side of things or the studio side of things, you're going to see the same people that you worked with in your entry-level positions. Ideally, for the rest of your career, you'll be friends and competitors, as you rise up through the ranks. So, and I still work with Mike all the time.
Wow.
So, and that's almost 40 years ago.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Super cool. All right, moving along. Question two. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and you and I both know that it is no different in the music industry. But
Yeah.
sometimes people think that's a bad thing. That's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
Um, from a recording perspective, because I'm such a champion of engineers, I think that people really need to understand that, just like in the film industry or any industry where there's people behind the scenes who actually make things happen, live sound people on tour, et cetera. There's so many people in these relatively behind the scenes jobs that actually make everything amazing. So it's not, yeah, like you said, it's not a bad thing. But the secret that I would say is that engineers are geniuses and they take what an artist does and they enhance it. And that's a good thing. It might be considered a dirty little secret or a little secret or whatever. But I would have to say just a huge shout out to those engineers who take the recording, when they're recording an artist and really enhance it, really put their skill and their art and their talent into making the music even better.
And so I feel like people that aren't necessarily familiar with the music industry wouldn't know off the bat like what that even means, like enhancing a record. Like how would you describe that? What goes into that?
Well, I
Technical.
mean, when an artist comes into a studio or if they're making music in their house, they're using something to capture it. So that method of capture may be different from place to place, but at the end of the day, you don't hear music that hasn't been recorded. So
Mm-hmm.
the person who's recording it, the person who's capturing it, that person's an engineer. And they're got the hardest job. It's like a mix of art and science. It's super technical, but they're also incredibly artistic and usually very musical. Some are musicians, some are not. But I would say that what that really means is you have a great song, which is most important. Most important thing is great song, great performance, passion, etc. But the engineer, his job is to capture that performance and then to use equipment, whether it's plugins or a console or analog equipment, plugins on a Pro Tools rig. The main thing that's changed for me is that people use computers instead of tape machines. But we use tape machines all the time. I mean, we're using a 2-inch 16 track today in one of the rooms. So everything old is new again. And engineers have to know even more than they ever did, both digital and analog equipment. So what they do when they're capturing it is the acoustic space, we call it the room as instruments. So the acoustic space that you're in when you're inside a studio matters a great deal, can really enhance and make the music sound better. The microphones make it better. But all of this is in the engineer's hands, in his ears. So he's working with the producer and with the artist to best capture your performance. So yeah, they're the secret weapons, truly, honestly.
That's amazing. Well, that is the secret.
Yeah, that's the secret. Hire an engineer. That's the secret.
Yeah. All right. Final question. Here we go. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or maybe even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
What do I think the most important quality that someone who does my job can have? I actually haven't really been asked that question, but
Interesting.
not in that way. And I would say to be gracious, to be welcoming, because really what my job is and what my staff's job is, studios, I mean, they're like hotels with technology, but without the people, it's just a building. So the people are so important. I know AI may come along and things might start happening, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a person that's going to make someone feel special. It's the little details of making people feel welcome, because artists are creative, and they need to have a trust and they need to be able to come into an environment where they are excited and where they can just create. I mean, I've said many times that, you just sort of have to get them everything they need, and then get out of their way,
Mm-hmm.
and not insert yourself. Yeah. So the most important thing would be to be gracious and stay in your lane.
Yeah.
you know,
You've got to tell us what is like the coolest project that you didn't know was happening at the time, but then you found out later.
I have told this story before, but it's a great story. A lot of times you're right. A lot of times when people come in, I don't know, I might know the name of the artist, but if they're working on a movie or a film, I don't, I don't know what they're doing. It doesn't have a title yet. But one of the things that happened one was a really good day, and I've told this before, and it's not necessarily a project per se, but it was when this studio was called Cello. It was before it used to be called Cello before it was East West, from like 2000, like 1999, 98 to 05. And we had the great pleasure of working a lot with Rick Rubin. He brought a lot of projects here, and Bob Rock, and I had mentioned Mike Klink earlier. So Motley Crue was here in one room. Audio Slave was in another room with Chris Cornell, and Mick Jagger was here working on the soundtrack for Alfie with
wow.
Dave Stewart. Yeah, Mick Jagger's super, super cool. They're all super cool. And the beginning of the story is amusing. So I hope if Mick ever hears this, that he doesn't get mad. But he called on the landline and said that the paparazzi, there were like all kinds of camera people outside. And I was like, wow, that's weird. No one knows you're here. So it was a manual gate. And I went out and had someone open the gate. And he came into my office, and he goes, wow, that was crazy. And we were standing in my office. And earlier that morning, Nikki Sixx had come in from Motley Crue and asked me to introduce him to Chris Cornell, because he wanted to meet Chris Cornell. So that was earlier in the day. And Mick is standing in my office, and my office was near Studio One, and I could hear this song coming through the door of Studio One, and it was a Stones song. And I think it was Street Fighting Man. I'm not sure what track it was. And Mick was standing in my office, and he had finished overdubbing and was now moving to the other side of the building to mix in studio, what we call Studio 5. And he goes, what's that then? And I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay, that's crazy. So I buzzed into the control room, and I asked the assistant engineer, I said, are you recording right now? And he said, no. And I said, okay, I'm going to come to the back of Studio One with someone. And he said, yeah, come on in. So I walked in with Mick Jagger, and the producer's in the control room. He can see me through the glass. His jaw drops. The band stops playing. Motley Crue stops playing. Chris Cornell is singing, and he can't see me because his back is to us. So he finally stops and turns around, and Mick Jagger claps, and he says, I sanction this recording or this performance. And he looked at Chris and he goes, not bad. So everybody, just to show you, everybody, there's a star, that's even bigger to them. So Mick Jagger was big to those guys. So it was really cool.
All right. Well, Candace, it has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Rachel, thank you for asking me.
And to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking 3 powerful questions. See you next time.